It's my wedding day, and my best man decides to propose in the middle of my reception. Suddenly, everyone's celebrating his engagement instead of my marriage. I couldn't believe it. My 30m wedding was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. My wife, 28f, and I spent months planning every detail, and it turned out perfect, almost. My best man, let's call him John, 32m, has been my closest friend since childhood. Naturally, I asked him to be my best man, and he accepted with excitement. The ceremony was beautiful, and the reception was even better. Everything was going smoothly until the speeches. John got up to give his best man speech. At first, it was full of the usual jokes and heartfelt stories, which everyone enjoyed. But then, out of nowhere, he turned to his girlfriend, 25f, and started talking about their relationship. Before I knew it, he was down on one knee, proposing to her right there in the middle of my reception. The room went silent. I could feel my wife's hand squeezing mine tighter and tighter. John's girlfriend said yes, and everyone started clapping and cheering, but I was fuming. I felt like my special day had been hijacked. Instead of celebrating our marriage, everyone was now focused on John and his fiancée. After the initial shock wore off, I confronted John and told him he was out of line. He said he thought it would be a great surprise and assumed I would be happy for him. I told him he was selfish and inconsiderate, and I ended up kicking him out of the reception. Now, some of our mutual friends are saying I overreacted and that I should have let it slide for the sake of our friendship. My wife fully supports my decision, but I'm starting to wonder if I was too harsh. AITA for firing my best man and kicking him out of my wedding for proposing during my reception? Update 1. Alright, so it's been about a week since the wedding chaos. I was fully convinced that people would realize John overstepped and that, with a little time, things would just blow over. I thought I could move forward, let it roll off my back. My wife and I had a small gathering planned for family and close friends at her parents' place, kind of a final hurrah before we left for the honeymoon. I figured it'd be a good chance for us to celebrate with just our people, no drama or anything. I thought this would be the closure we needed. But no, the plot thickened. We get to the gathering, and the vibe is weird. People are greeting us, sure, but they're giving us those overly sympathetic looks, like they're sorry for us, and at first, I'm confused. My wife noticed it too, so we tried to shake it off and focus on enjoying the moment, but we could tell there was a giant, metaphorical elephant in the room. Just when I'm starting to feel like maybe we're being paranoid, my cousin, who's notoriously blunt, sidles up to me and says, "So, how are you and John doing?" Now, I'll be real, I hadn't heard from John since the wedding blowout. He hadn't called, texted, or even sent a half-hearted congrats message. It was radio silence, which, at the time, I thought was just him being embarrassed or giving me space. I told my cousin I hadn't heard from him, figuring he was just dealing with his own fallout from the situation. My cousin gives me this skeptical look, raises an eyebrow, and tells me, well, he's been telling people his side, and honestly, it's not a great look for you. I'm completely taken aback. Like, what side could he possibly have? I mean, he hijacked my wedding. But apparently, John's been painting himself as the victim here, saying he innocently proposed to his girlfriend during a speech that was mostly about celebrating us. He's telling people that my reaction was over the top and that I threw him out just because he wanted to include a special moment on our special day. According to John, I should have been honored that he chose our wedding to pop the question since, in his words, it just proves how much love was in the air. Apparently, I've been an uptight groomzilla who can't stand sharing the spotlight. To make it worse, my cousin hints that John's girlfriend is also actively backing his story. She's apparently telling people that she had no idea John was going to propose and that I ruined what was supposed to be a beautiful moment between them. According to her, I embarrassed John in front of everyone by kicking him out and that he was heartbroken and humiliated, which is why he's been so quiet. I don't know how to feel about this because it honestly sounds like they've managed to twist things around to make me look like the villain in my own wedding story. I was trying to keep my cool, but I couldn't stop myself from asking around, casually dropping questions to see if anyone else had heard John's version. The reactions were mixed. Some people kind of nodded like they'd already made up their minds, while others just said they didn't want to get involved, which only made it worse. My wife noticed my tension and asked what was going on, so I filled her in on what I'd heard. She was just as furious as I was, saying she couldn't believe the nerve of John to twist things after we trusted him with the role of best man. Later in the evening, I pulled my best friend Sam aside, the guy who has known both John and me for years, and asked him what he thought. Sam seemed hesitant, but he admitted he'd heard John's version and that, honestly, some people were siding with him. According to Sam, there's a growing narrative that I made a mountain out of a molehill and that John's proposal was just an innocent gesture misinterpreted by me in the heat of the moment. Sam even suggested that John had been telling people I was jealous because he and his girlfriend looked so happy together and that I'd overreacted out of insecurity. I can't lie, hearing this from Sam stung. My wife and I spent the rest of the night plastering on fake smiles and trying to keep up appearances, but inside, I was fuming. This wasn't the vibe we wanted for our little celebration, and it completely threw a shadow over the whole evening. On the way home, my wife and I finally let it out, venting about how we couldn't believe John had managed to turn people against us. She suggested we set the record straight, maybe put out a message to explain what really happened. Part of me wants to, but another part of me is worried that trying to explain might just make it look like we're adding fuel to the fire. Things took an even stranger turn the next day. My wife and I decided to do something low-key to get our minds off the drama, so we went for a hike. Midway through, I get a notification. John tagged me in a post. Curiosity got the best of me, so I clicked on it, and my jaw dropped. John had posted a series of pictures from the wedding, including a shot of him on one knee with his girlfriend crying and looking surprised. The caption? Couldn't think of a better way to celebrate love than by proposing to the love of my life on the day my best friend married his. He'd even added a sappy hashtag like #love was in the air. The comments were already flooding in, people congratulating him, calling it romantic, and saying how they wished they'd been there to see such a beautiful moment. As I scrolled through, I realized the post was almost entirely about his proposal, not about my wedding. In fact, aside from the initial sentence, there was hardly a mention of me or my wife at all. It was all about him and his new fiancée, and people were eating it up, congratulating them, and completely ignoring the fact that this was supposed to be about us. That's when I made a decision. I'd been second-guessing myself, doubting my reaction, but seeing that post confirmed it. John wasn't sorry, he didn't think he'd done anything wrong, and he was perfectly happy to turn my wedding into his personal proposal backdrop. He wasn't my friend in that moment, he was someone who cared more about his own spotlight than respecting one of the most important days of my life. So, I did something a little impulsive, I left a comment on his post. Nothing dramatic, just a simple, "Glad you got your moment, even if it cost us hours." Then, I unfollowed him, and my wife did the same. The fallout was immediate. Within minutes, John was texting me, accusing me of trying to ruin his happiness and saying that I'd embarrassed him publicly. He threw back everything our mutual friends had been saying, calling me uptight, telling me that a real friend would be happy for him, and he ended it with a passive-aggressive "hope you have a nice honeymoon, if you can get over yourself." I haven't responded yet. My wife thinks we should block him and move on, that he's shown his true colors, and there's no going back. Part of me wants to agree, but another part of me is just floored by how quickly things spiraled. All I know is that whatever happens next, John has made it clear he's not the friend I thought he was. Update 2. So, we're back from our honeymoon, and what should have been a time to relax and move on turned out to be anything but. Turns out John's pettiness wasn't done with us yet. After my last update, I blocked him on social media, figuring it would end the drama, but it seems like it only made him escalate things. When we returned, our phones were flooded with texts, DMs, even emails from mutual friends and family members who'd clearly been fed John's twisted version of events. The number of "we need to talk" messages was absurd, and it was clear that John had been busy playing the victim while we were gone. One message, in particular, hit hard. It was from my uncle, someone I've always been close to. He wrote a long message saying he was deeply disappointed in how I'd handled things with John, calling me cold and unsupportive. He said he couldn't understand why I couldn't just be happy for John, that love is love and that if I had any compassion, I'd apologize and try to mend the friendship. He ended the message saying, "Family is family," which hit me hard, because to him, John has always been like a second son. This "family is family" line was the theme I kept hearing, and it's been driving me crazy because John and I aren't related, not even close. We're just childhood friends, but because he's been part of so many family events, they act like he's my actual brother. My wife pointed out that John's been taking advantage of this honorary family status, using it to manipulate people. She's not wrong. Still, hearing my own family turn on me over John's sob story made me wonder if I needed to clear things up. We decided we'd have to address it, but carefully. So, we planned a dinner with my parents, who've been completely blindsided by the whole situation, and invited a couple of other family members who were close to John. We thought it'd be best to set the record straight with them first. When we got there, we immediately felt the tension. They didn't give us the cold shoulder, exactly, but they weren't their usual warm selves either. My dad pulled me aside, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "Son, just explain to us why you threw him out. We just don't get it." I could tell he was genuinely hurt and confused. So, I did just that. I laid it all out, the entire story about John's speech, his sudden proposal, and how it completely shifted the focus from our wedding to his engagement. I told them about his refusal to understand why it hurt us, about the comments he'd been making to people, and about how he'd twisted things to make us look like villains. My dad seemed to listen, but I could see the disbelief in his eyes. I could tell he was thinking, is it really that big of a deal? But my wife, thankfully, jumped in and backed me up. She reminded them that a wedding is supposed to be about the couple, and that it was unfair to hijack it for a proposal, no matter how romantic John thought he was being. That's when my mom chimed in. She admitted that John had actually called her while we were on our honeymoon, crying about how he'd lost his best friend. She said he sounded genuinely upset and heartbroken. According to her, he'd been spinning it as if I'd cut him off for no reason, like I just kicked him out over a harmless gesture. He even hinted that I'd changed since I got married, that I'd become controlling and overprotective of my new wife, which made me look even worse. My mom started tearing up as she told me all of this, saying, "I don't understand why you two can't just talk it out." I was about to respond when my phone buzzed, and I kid you not, it was a message from a random number. Curiosity got the better of me, so I checked, and it was from John's fiancée. She wrote this long, sappy message about how she didn't want to come between us and that she missed seeing us together, but then she dropped this bombshell. She said John had been devastated, to the point of considering calling off the engagement. She claimed that John was spiraling because he felt like he'd ruined our friendship and that he thought maybe he wasn't good enough to be my friend. It felt like a weird mix of guilt tripping and pity baiting, and honestly, it just made me feel manipulated. I looked up from my phone, totally at a loss, and realized everyone was staring at me, waiting for me to say something. My dad asked, "What is it?" So, I read the message out loud. When I finished, my mom had her hand over her mouth, clearly conflicted, and my dad just shook his head, saying, "This has gone too far." He turned to me, saying he believed John was being dramatic, but that maybe I should just talk to him, to clear the air once and for all. My wife immediately disagreed, saying we shouldn't reward John's behavior by giving him any more chances, and I agreed with her. Still, my parents insisted, saying that if we were all family, then we had a duty to at least try to work things out. Eventually, I agreed to meet with John, but only if it was in a neutral space and only with a mediator, someone we both trusted. I suggested Sam, the friend who'd been with us through thick and thin. Surprisingly, John agreed to the setup without any drama. I thought maybe, finally, he was willing to own up to his actions. The meeting was set for a cafe we used to go to as kids. When John arrived, he looked like a mess, dark circles under his eyes, and he had this sheepish expression that, for a second, actually made me feel bad. But as soon as we sat down, he launched into this spiel about how he thought he was adding to the love on our wedding day, that he never meant to make it about him. He went on about how he just thought it was the perfect moment and that if I'd seen how happy his girlfriend was, I'd understand why he did it. I told him that wasn't the point. It wasn't about his girlfriend's happiness, it was our wedding day. I explained, again, how hurtful it was to feel like our celebration had been overshadowed. I told him it wasn't just a nice gesture, it was our day, and he took that from us. For a minute, he looked genuinely remorseful, like maybe it was finally clicking. But then he said something that caught me completely off guard. He looked at me, dead serious, and said, "I thought you'd understand. After all, it's not like it was your first wedding." To say I was speechless would be an understatement. For context, yes, I was married before in my early 20s, but it was a completely different time in my life, and it ended amicably years ago. My current wife has been nothing but supportive, and our relationship is worlds apart from my first. I could see my wife's face go pale, and even Sam's jaw dropped. John just kept going, saying he thought this wedding was more about the family than anything else, so it shouldn't have been such a big deal if he shared the spotlight for a brief moment. At that point, Sam stepped in, telling John he was way out of line and that this wasn't the time to bring up my past. But John doubled down, saying I was the one who made it into a big deal, that my reaction was more about control than anything else. He even said he thought I was trying to prove something with this wedding because I'd already been through it once. That was it for me. I told John that if he genuinely thought our wedding was no big deal because it wasn't my first, then he had no business being my best man in the first place. I told him I couldn't believe I'd misjudged him this badly and that, at this point, I was done. I said he needed to seriously reflect on why he felt the need to make everything about himself and that I didn't need this kind of toxicity in my life. As I left, I could hear him trying to call me back, but I didn't turn around. Sam stayed behind to talk to him, but I don't know what was said, and honestly, I don't care. I've come to realize that some people only care about themselves, and that's not the kind of friend I need.